Konnichiwa mina, and here is week 16 of the 2017 PFA season, the week of December 3rd through 4th, as we're getting closer down to the final 5 weeks of the season as we get closer to the playoffs. So we get the video started by taking a look at the standings after week 15. In the National East, it's Manhattan with the tiebreaker over Cleveland in the National East. And then in the National Central, Omaha has the one-game lead over Denver. Jacksonville, has the one-game lead over Birmingham in the National South. And Oakland has the 1.5-game lead, I think, over Phoenix and Los Angeles in the National West. In the Century East, Pittsburgh has a 1.5-game lead, I guess, over Columbus in the Century East. Oklahoma has the 1-game lead, I believe, over Chicago in the Century Central. Dallas has the 1-game lead over Miami in the Century South, and El Paso has the 1-game lead over San Francisco in the Century West. It could actually be possible this week we could finally have Jacksonville make the playoffs if they beat Birmingham and Denver and San Antonio loses. So that's a possibility. And a couple teams could be eliminated this week too. So we then take a look at the schedule for week 16, and oh boy, there's some big games on this list. First up, Columbus at Baltimore, pretty big game in the Century East. Then Kansas City at Boston, Portland at Buffalo, Houston at Cincinnati, and then the big showdown in the National South. Birmingham visited Jacksonville. First time this season they're playing against each other. Number one offense against number one defense, with the National South and probably first round bye and home field advantage on the line. That's going to be huge. And then Oakland at Louisville, Oklahoma at Minneapolis, a big game in the Century Central. Manhattan at Orlando, Cleveland at Philadelphia, and San Francisco at San Antonio, a big game between two outer conference teams. And then we get to the 4 p.m. games, a big game in the Century Conference as El Paso visits Detroit, Seattle visits Hawaii, Indianapolis visits Las Vegas. Then a big game in the outer conference showdown as Denver visits Miami, Los Angeles visits Phoenix, big game in the National West, New Orleans at Pittsburgh, Washington at San Diego, and then the big Sunday night game, the rematch of PFA Bowl 1 as Chicago visits Omaha in the Memorial Stadium. That's going to be huge. And then finally the Monday night game, Dallas at Atlanta. So let's get week 16 underway. So we get the week started with our first game of the week, the Century East matchup between Columbus and Baltimore, as both teams are trying to hang on and keep up with Pittsburgh in the Century East, as that's probably the only way now they're going to probably be able to make it to the playoffs. Baltimore would obliterate Columbus as they win 38-0 in the 4th most lopsided PFA game ever by 38 points. Holy shit. Baltimore's quarterback Andrew Lassiter, 12 of 18, 253 yards and 3 touchdowns. Their wide receiver Ariel Leary, 4 receptions, 106 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Timothy Dawson, 3 receptions, 112 yards and a touchdown. And their Columbus's linebacker John Joel, 11 tackles and a sack, and Baltimore's strong safety Juan Pike, 12 tackles, a forced fumble, and a pick 6. So what a dominant performance this was by Baltimore, as Columbus's backup quarterback threw 4 picks in this game. They really need Albert Hendrick back very badly, as they're running out of chances to win the division. Then we go up north to Gillette Stadium in a rain as the Kansas City Hammerheads visit the Boston Destroyers, as Kansas City needs to win to keep up in the very competitive Century Central and the very competitive Century Conference playoff bracket, as Boston was long eliminated and all they're doing now is just playing spoiler. And Boston would spoil as they pull off the upset 17-9 in an all-defensive showdown, as neither offenses could get anything going. Kansas City's defensive end Michael Mabey, 12 tackles and a sack, and Otis Linder had 5 tackles and 3 sacks. And Boston's linebacker Ronald Billings, 12 tackles and a sack, and Daniel Sparks, 11 tackles. A very impressive win for Boston, knocking off a team that honestly probably should have beaten them. And another tough loss for Kansas City, because remember, Baltimore destroyed them last week, and they've gone, I think, 1-4 the last 5 weeks. So yeah, that is definitely not good for them. Then we go up to Buffalo, where it's cold. They're dealing with the same storm that Boston had, but now it's sleeting instead because it's much more colder, as the Portland Dragons visit the Buffalo Sabres as they made the cross-country trip as Portland needs to win to keep in the playoff hunt. A loss here would be very devastating. And Buffalo would get it in overtime, 23-20, as Portland got their first losing season. And Buffalo's quarterback Ricky Bailey was 16 of 22, 174 yards and a touchdown before being knocked out of the game with a concussion. We're not sure if he's going to be able to come back next week, but his backup did a solid job. And Portland's linebacker Zachary Wood had 11 tackles and a sack. Tough loss for Portland, because now if Oakland wins later today, they will be eliminated from the playoffs. What a tough break, since they had such a 4-game win streak early in the year. It looked like they were going to really make a run at for Oakland. So then we go out to Cincinnati as the Houston Twisters visit the Cincinnati Colts. As Houston's already been eliminated, they're just trying to play spoiler, as Cincinnati's trying to keep up in the Century East to try and win that division, as they still have a shot and probably the only way they're going to get into the playoffs. And Cincinnati would win it in an all-defensive showdown, as the only touchdowns in this game were pick sixes. Both quarterbacks were terrible. Their defenses did all the work. Houston's linebacker Juan McKnight had 12 tackles. Cincinnati's linebacker Adolph Lewis had 12 tackles, and their cornerback Kevin Belcher had 2 tackles, 2 picks, with one of them being a pick six, as the Houston Twisters suffer their first losing season, as this season continues to be a disaster for them, as Cincinnati surprisingly almost near 500 and still in the contention to win the Century East. And then we get to the big showdown down in Jacksonville. That's probably the biggest game of the season so far, as it's a National South showdown with the National South on the line. Birmingham Hornets bringing the #1 defense in against the #1 offense and #1 team in the league so far, the Jacksonville Bucks. Oh my God, this is going to be a huge showdown. The only problem for Jacksonville is they still don't have Michael Witters, who's still out for the injury this week as his backup. He's still playing good, so maybe Jacksonville could have a shot and actually pull off an upset here maybe. But it wouldn't matter. Birmingham dominated Jacksonville 24-9 in an all-defensive showdown, as both quarterbacks were terrible. Ollie Burke was especially, as Birmingham's running back Guy Metz did all the work, 22 carries and a $125. And their defensive end Francis Reuter had 10 tackles and a sack. Jacksonville's strong safety Ernest Gwynn, 12 tackles, a sack, and a fumble recovery. And free safety David Stock, 10 tackles, a sack, an interception, and a fumble recovery. Jacksonville's defense did their best, but their offense was shit when it came to sack and sting. So a huge win for Birmingham, as they now lead this National South. And with that loss, unless Denver and San Antonio loses, Jacksonville's going to have to wait another week to get a playoff berth. Then we go down to Louisville, as it's two of the worst teams last year and are still in the playoff hunt, as the Oakland Majors visit the Louisville Saints. And if Oakland wins, they'll knock Portland out of the playoffs, along with Louisville too. So both these teams desperately need to get this win. And Oakland would get the victory, 14-10. And with that, Louisville and the Portland Dragons are eliminated from the playoffs. It was an all-defensive game, as both Reuben Williams and Stanford Fink didn't really do much. Oakland's wide receiver Joshua Crane continued to have a good season, 7 receptions and a $101. And Louisville's linebacker Larry Mercier had 12 tackles. Tough loss for Louisville, since they're now eliminated again from the playoffs, but there's still a lot of promise going into next year, so they got a lot of optimism. Oakland still in the playoff hunt and in the driver's seat of the National West now that they've knocked out one of their opponents in the division. They still got to worry about Hawaii, Los Angeles, and Phoenix, though. Then we go up north to Minneapolis for the coldest game so far this year, as the big Century Central showdown, as the Oklahoma Oilers visit the Minneapolis Kitsune. And good news for Oklahoma, Peter Rhodes is back from his third injury this year, so let's see how well Oklahoma can do in this game, as they're still trying to keep up against the Chicago and Detroit in their division. But Minneapolis would pull it off 30-21, as they're still in the playoff hunt, as Oklahoma's quarterback Peter Rhodes was 21 of 31, 143 yards, a touchdown and a pick. He didn't do good passing, but look at his rushing game. 7 carries for 118 yards and a touchdown. He can still run. That's one thing he has over Wiley Chester. He can run, unlike that other player. Oklahoma's running back Ricky Roller, 27 carries, 134 yards and a touchdown. So wow, Oklahoma had over 250 yards rushing and still couldn't get the victory. as their linebacker Matt Duff had 10 tackles. Minneapolis' linebacker Eric Witt had 13 tackles. So, another devastating loss for Oklahoma. Matter of fact, they've lost 2 in a row. They've lost probably the majority of their games the last 5 in a row, as Minneapolis finally ended their 3-game losing streak and are still in the playoff hunt, be it very slim still. Then we go down south to Orlando in the rain, as we got a big outer conference showdown as the Manhattan Greens visit the Orlando Astros, as Manhattan's trying to keep their lead over Cleveland in the National East, as Orlando's trying to keep up to make their very slim playoff appearance alive still. And Manhattan would get in another overtime thriller as they win 41-35 in an offensive shootout, as it was the 9th highest scoring game in PFA history with 76 points in total. Man, both offenses were clicking. And matter of fact, their defensive players were doing so well that I couldn't even fit them on the list. I had to go with just the offensive players, because this list is incredible. Manhattan's quarterback, Jamie Norwood, 23 of 31, 385 yards and 4 touchdowns. He had a perfect game, too. Orlando's quarterback, Milton Hester, 12 of 26, 322 yards, 5 touchdowns, but 2 picks. Orlando's running back, Frank Heavens, had 27 carries, 132 yards, and 4 receptions for 139 yards. He had over 250 total yards, for crying out loud. Wide receiver for Manhattan, David Nato, 6 receptions, 166 yards, and a touchdown. Lawrence Irons, 6 receptions, a $114, and 2 scores. And Orlando's wide receiver Jonathan Swanson, 4 receptions, a $122, and 3 scores, which would have been in the record books if it wasn't for 5. I mean, a whole bunch of other players getting them 3 receiving touchdowns. So, wow, what an incredible game that was. Manhattan got a very close one, as they still maintain their lead over the Cleveland Bulldogs and have the 2nd seed right now still in the National Conference playoff bracket. Then we go up to Philadelphia as the Cleveland Bulldogs visit the Philadelphia Hawks in a National East showdown, as Cleveland trying to keep up with Manhattan. Now that they've won, they got to keep up the wins to be right there with them, as Philadelphia trying to recover from their terrible playoff missed season and just trying to play spoiler now. And Philadelphia would pull off the upset 24-19 as Cleveland continues to struggle offensively. Losing Gerald Todd for a couple weeks is really, really hurting them, as Scott Hernandez has just not been the same without him. Philadelphia's quarterback Leroy Black, 16 of 27, 254 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. Ever since he had that injury, he's been starting to majorly turn it around. Cleveland's wide receiver Ron Marlone, the rookie, 5 receptions, 107 yards. Philadelphia's wide receiver Everett Shapiro, 4 receptions, 116 yards, and a score. Cleveland's strong safety Theodore Ferguson, 10 tackles, and Philadelphia's linebackers Rick Lopez, 11 tackles and a sack, and Mario Henry, 10 tackles. So another big win for Philadelphia. As a matter of fact, I think they've won 3 in a row now, as Cleveland now another loss, as their playoff hopes not only of winning the National East, but their slim playoff hopes are really, really starting to get thinned, as Denver and San Antonio are really starting to come up from behind them. Speaking of San Antonio, the San Antonio Longhorns host the San Francisco Union in our next game, as it's a big outer conference showdown, as both teams trying to keep competitive. San Francisco's trying to keep up with El Paso and stay ahead of Seattle and Las Vegas in the Century West. San Antonio's trying to catch up with Birmingham and Jacksonville in the very strong National South. And El Paso would win it in another overtime game, the 3rd one this week. What a game this was. San Antonio's quarterback Glenn Chen was 24-35, 379 yards, 3 touchdowns, but 3 picks. That was not a good game for him. And San Francisco's running back Anthony Marks had 25 carries, 164 yards, which is now 10th most rushing yards in a game. San Antonio's running back Elvis Smith, 25 carries, 122 yards, and 2 scores. San Antonio's wide receiver Deion Gardner, 9 receptions, a $147 and a score. And Scott Lopez had 5 receptions, a $133 and another score. And San Francisco's strong safety Andy Padilla, 12 tackles. And San Antonio's linebacker Edward Gardner, 12 tackles and 2 sacks. Big win for San Antonio, as they're now still in the driver's seat of catching up with Cleveland in the playoffs. A tough loss for San Francisco, as that's going to really hurt. And with that, all the 1 p.m. games over, as we go to the 4 p.m. games with a big Century Conference showdown, as the El Paso Mustangs visit the Detroit Engines, as El Paso, with that loss to San Francisco, are going to try and start spreading that gap out in between them, as Detroit lost 2 games in a row with their just not looking really good and still trying to keep their slim playoff hopes alive. And El Paso would get it 17-0 in a shutout, as Detroit's lost 3 in a row now with their offense just going nowhere, as El Paso got their first win season ever. El Paso's quarterback James Fabinovidox, 18 of 28, 235 yards and 2 scores. And El Paso's running back, Allen Davis, had 27 carries, 164 yards, which would have been the record books if Anthony Marks didn't get his run earlier today. El Paso's linebacker, Albert Corwin, 11 tackles and a sack. Detroit's defense was pretty efficient today. Robert Bryson, 15 tackles and 2 sacks. And Kyle McCoon, 11 tackles. So yeah, losing Joseph Chavez the last couple weeks has really hurt Detroit, as they're barely hanging on to a slim playoff hopes, as El Paso is getting closer to maybe clinching the division very soon. That would be awesome for them if they do so. Then we go out to Honolulu, as the Seattle Quakes make it all the way across the Pacific to face the Hawaii Phantoms, as Hawaii's continuing to struggle, losing 5 in a row, as Seattle has won 3 in a row and trying to keep up now. If they win here, they'll take the lead for a second place spot over San Francisco in the Century West. And Seattle would win it 38-24 to win 4 in a row, as Seattle's quarterback Ken Rodriguez, who's played the last 2 games, taking over Jody Tucker's spot, and was 17 of 30, 252 yards and 2 touchdowns. Hawaii's quarterback Richard Clough, 19 of 29, 318 yards, 3 touchdowns and a pick. His best game, and of course wasn't really enough. Seattle's wide receiver Eric Benjamin, 5 receptions, 148 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's having an incredible season. Hawaii's linebacker Eric Fay, 4 receptions, 139 yards and a touchdown. And Hawaii's linebacker Wilson Sharp with 14 tackles and 2 sacks, as Hawaii suffered their first ever losing season, losing 6 in a row now. A very disappointing season, but they are still in playoff contention, unlike Portland, which is unbelievable. But a big win for Seattle, as they're now second place in the Century West. Then we go back to the continental U.S., as it's the Indianapolis Express visiting the Las Vegas Gamblers, as both teams are struggling. Las Vegas has lost 3 in a row. Indianapolis has won 3 in a row, but of course, unfortunately for them, their last 5 games are on the road, so if they want to make a playoff run, they're going to have to do it all on the road. Las Vegas would get the win 24-14 to end their 4-game losing streak, although Indianapolis' quarterback Rodney Sanders outplayed Las Vegas' Keith Belcher, 18 of 35, 233 yards and 2 touchdowns. Indianapolis' wide receivers Robert Monahan was 7 receptions, $102 and a touchdown. And Kevin Ivey, 6 receptions, $107 and a score. They did pretty good. And Las Vegas' linebacker John Maxwell was 6 receptions for 149 yards and 2 scores. Big win for Las Vegas. They need that to keep up in the very competitive Century West, but a tough loss for Indianapolis, as their chances to make the playoffs are getting lower and lower each week. Then we go down to Miami for a big outer conference showdown, as Denver visited Miami. This could have been a PFA Bowl preview. Unfortunately for Denver, after now winning 5 in a row, they start off very terribly. Miami's now lost 3 in a row, and both teams need to get this win very badly in order to keep in the playoff bracket. Denver trying to catch up to Omaha and keep ahead of San Antonio, and Miami's trying to catch up with Dallas in their division. And Miami would get the victory 24-14, ending their 3-game losing streak, and in Denver's 5-game win streak. And with this win, San Diego is eliminated from the playoffs. Miami's quarterback Anthony McCormick was 22 of 38, 278 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick, as their wide receiver Daniel Patel, 6 receptions, 124 yards and a touchdown. And Victor Green, 6 receptions, 114 yards and a touchdown. Big win for Miami, as they won despite not having Edward Miller for the rest of the season. A tough loss for Denver, but they still have a shot to maybe make the playoffs, but they got to really work hard and try and keep up with Omaha. Then we go down southwest to a National West showdown, as the Los Angeles Angels visit the Phoenix Storm, as both teams are trying to win to keep up with Oakland in their division, as they're like the last 2 teams that have any shot to challenge them. And Phoenix would win it 24-17, as they now won 2 in a row. Los Angeles' backup quarterback Jocelyn Rowland, 19 of 36, 273 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's played really good in the absence of Michael Green. Maybe it's like to be a quarterback controversy, as Phoenix's quarterback James Cruz, 21 of 38, 360 yards, 3 touchdowns and a pick. That was his first touchdown in over 2 months. That was a big performance right there. As their running back David Sexton, 25 carries, 102 yards. Los Angeles wide receiver William Stewart had 5 receptions, $127 and a score. And Phoenix's wide receiver Craig McCaskill, 7 receptions, 110 yards and a touchdown. Los Angeles linebacker Julius Searcy, 14 tackles and a sack. As, like I said, Phoenix has swept Los Angeles as they now take second place behind Oakland, as they're still trying to keep up with Oakland to prevent them from winning in the National West. Then we go down the Heinz Field as it's the New Orleans Jazz visiting the Pittsburgh Blitz, as the Jazz are just trying to play spoilers now in the rain, as Pittsburgh's now won 3 in a row and trying to keep up ahead of everyone else in the Century East and get themselves in good position to win the division. Pittsburgh would get 17-14 in a defensive struggle, as New Orleans' quarterback outplayed Pittsburgh's Gerald Putman. James Williams, 20 of 31, 199 yards and a touchdown. New Orleans' linebacker Keith Garcia continues to have a strong season, 13 tackles and a sack. Pittsburgh's linebacker Thomas Hare, 12 tackles, and their defensive end Charlie Weber, 11 tackles, 4 sacks and a fumble recovery. So a big win for Pittsburgh as they set themselves up to win the division, believe it or not, possibly next week if they beat Baltimore. So that's going to be big. So we'll have to wait and see on that. And then we go out west to San Diego, as it's the Washington Americans visiting the San Diego Rays, who were just eliminated earlier today. And of course, this is a rematch from their last game last year, where Washington came in here, won 21-9 or something like that to get first round bye. However, unfortunately, the tide to turn between these two playoff teams, as they're on the verge of being eliminated, or in case of San Diego's case, already was eliminated, so they're just playing spoiler. San Diego would get the victory 21-3 to get their revenge, as San Diego's quarterback Ronaldo Schneider was 10 of 20, 101 yards and 2 scores. Not really good stats other than those 2 touchdowns. Washington's defensive end Ira Washington, 13 tackles and 3 sacks. San Diego's defense was swarming though today. Their quarterback Quincy Ramon, 10 tackles and an interception. Aaron Silvers, their linebacker, 10 tackles and a fumble recovery. Their strong safety James Stanley, 10 tackles, or Staley. And then their defensive end Gary Ray, 7 tackles, 2 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, recovering one of them. So what a dominant defensive performance San Diego did. But Washington, despite this tough loss, is still in the playoff hunt. And then it's Sunday night, and probably the most talked about off-season game all year is finally underway. The PFA Bowl 1 rematch, as the Chicago 71ers come into Omaha to play the Omaha Thunder to try and get revenge after losing them 35-9 in the championship. And that's the chance throughout the entire game, 35-9 throughout the Omaha crowd. As now with Matthew Smart actually playing, this could be a real indicator of who really was the better team that last year. Chicago would get their sweet revenge as they win 12-10 in a defensive struggle, as both offenses were absolutely terrible. The only highlight was Chicago's defensive end Alfred Helms, 8 tackles and 6 sacks, which is the 5th most all-time in a game, as Omaha continues to lose. They're on a 5-game losing streak. Are you kidding me? How can you keep losing all these close games like this? This is ridiculous. As Chicago got their sweet but ugly revenge. What a big game that was too. And with this win, Chicago right now has the number 1 seed again in the Century Conference. And then we get to our Monday night game, as it was a rematch from last year, as Dallas visits Atlanta. Remember, these two played on each other Sunday night last year, early in the season. Both were undefeated, and Atlanta knocked off Dallas's undefeated record, as both visit here on Monday night. Dallas trying to keep up against Miami in the Century South to try and maybe get close to clinching a playoff spot, as Atlanta's already been eliminated. They're just playing spoiler right now. Atlanta would beat Dallas once again, 24-21, as Dallas was up 21-0 in the first half, but Atlanta scored 24 unanswered points in the second quarter to get the victory. Wow, what a disastrous loss Dallas let to get by them, as Atlanta's quarterback Cody Perry was 11 of 19, 220 yards and a touchdown. Dallas's running back Justin Becker, 33 carries, 116 yards. Atlanta's wide receiver Joseph Eames, 3 receptions, 131 yards and a touchdown. Dallas's linebacker Victor Shores had 12 tackles. Atlanta's linebacker Marco Lang had 17 tackles and a forced fumble. And our quarterback Larry Carter had 10 tackles. Big win for Atlanta as they're playing spoiler. A tough loss for Dallas as they now lost their number 1 spot in the division to Miami. And now they're all the way back to 6th place in the playoff bracket in the Century Conference. So that was a disappointing loss, especially since they were up 21-0 going into the halftime. But with that, Week 16 is in the books as we're now down to the final 4 weeks of the season. And here is the standings. And in the National East, Manhattan now leads by a game over Cleveland. Omaha still has their 1-game lead over Denver in the National Central. Birmingham now has the tiebreaker over Jacksonville in the National South. And Oakland has the 2-game lead over Phoenix in the National West. Pittsburgh has the 2.5-game lead, I guess, over Baltimore and Cincinnati in the Century East. Chicago has the quarter-game lead over Oklahoma in the Century Central. Miami has that quarter-game lead over Dallas in the Century South. And El Paso has the 1.5-game lead, I guess, over Seattle in the Century West. As Louisville, Portland, and San Diego were all eliminated this week. But still, no one clinched a playoff spot. Unbelievable. So we now take a look at the playoff bracket starting in the National Conference. If the season ended today, it would be Birmingham and Manhattan with the byes, with Cleveland going to Omaha and Jacksonville going to Oakland, with San Antonio and Denver the only teams with a win record at the moment outside the playoff bracket, with Phoenix, Washington, Houston, Indianapolis, Los Angeles, and Hawaii remaining. And you're probably wondering, how on earth is Portland eliminated from the playoffs, but Hawaii isn't, since Hawaii has a worse record than Portland. Portland was swept by Oakland, so they have no way to catch up to Oakland. Hawaii split it with Oakland this year, or have a chance to split with them, and they can still get a better division record, so that's how Hawaii is still in. And we got some playoff clinching scenarios. First up is Birmingham. If they win and San Antonio loses, they are in the playoffs. Jacksonville also can clinch a playoff spot if they beat San Antonio next week. But that is it in terms of playoff clinching scenarios. And as for playoff elimination scenarios, we start with Hawaii. If they lose or Oakland wins, they are eliminated. Los Angeles would be eliminated too if they lose. Indianapolis would be eliminated if they lose. And if Omaha and Cleveland win. Washington will also be eliminated if they lose to Cleveland this coming week. But that is it in terms of playoff elimination. So 4 of the last remaining 7 teams could be eliminated in the National Conference, with 2 teams making it in. Meanwhile, we go over to the Century Conference playoff bracket, as right now at the season end today, it would be Chicago and Miami with the byes, with Dallas going to El Paso and Oklahoma going to Pittsburgh. And we have 7 teams in the playoff hunt still. They have a 500 record or above it. That is unbelievable, with Baltimore, Cincinnati, Columbus, Buffalo, and Orlando still in it despite their losing record. And we have a couple playoff clinching scenarios, starting off with Chicago. If they win and Detroit, Seattle, and San Francisco all lose, they will be in the playoffs. Pittsburgh can get in. Not only that, they can win the Century East if they win against Baltimore, and then Columbus and Buffalo loses next week. Cincinnati's got a bye week this week, but it doesn't matter. If Pittsburgh wins, they have the better division record over Cincinnati, so they'll clinch it, even though Cincinnati could still go 10-8. That's it for playoff clinching scenarios, but when it comes to eliminations, Baltimore will be eliminated if they lose to Pittsburgh. Buffalo and Columbus will both be eliminated if they lose and or Pittsburgh wins. Orlando will be eliminated if they lose. And even though Cincinnati's not playing this week, they could be eliminated if El Paso, Dallas, Pittsburgh, and Oklahoma all win, and Miami too. They will be eliminated if that happens. Las Vegas could be eliminated if they lose, and El Paso, Dallas, Pittsburgh, Oklahoma, and Miami all winning. Kansas City would be eliminated if they lose and or El Paso, Dallas, Pittsburgh, Oklahoma, and Miami win. Minneapolis is another team that, although they're on their bye this coming week, they could be eliminated if El Paso, Dallas, Pittsburgh, Oklahoma, and Miami all win. But that is it in the Century Conference. Chicago and Pittsburgh can clinch a playoff spot. And Orlando, Buffalo, Columbus, Cincinnati, Baltimore, Las Vegas, Kansas City, and Minneapolis could all be possibly eliminated next week. Wow. Talk about a major change in the bracket in the playoff hunt. And then we finish it off by taking a look at the Week 17 schedule. And oh boy, there's going to be a bunch of big games. First one being a possible PFA Bowl 2 preview as Birmingham goes to Chicago. The matchup between the number 1 seeds in each conference. Holy crap, that's going to be incredible with the 2 best defenses in the league. Oakland going to Columbus, Milwaukee going to Houston, Louisville going to Manhattan, Kansas City going to Oklahoma in a big Central showdown, Indianapolis going to Philadelphia, Jacksonville going to San Antonio. That's going to be a big National South showdown. Orlando going to Tampa, and then the 4 p.m. games will be Phoenix going to Denver. That's going to be a big National Conference game. Detroit going to El Paso. That's going to be big because they could be eliminated possibly this week. Los Angeles at Hawaii, big National West game. Buffalo going to San Francisco, a big game in the Century Conference. San Francisco and Miami, another big Century Conference game. Baltimore and Pittsburgh with the Century East on the line, and these two are arch rivals, so that's going to be huge. Seattle going to San Diego, that's going to be big. Then Cleveland going to Washington, another big National Conference game. And then we finish off the Sunday night with Atlanta going to Portland. 2 teams that are eliminated, but it's going to be an offensive juggernaut, so watch out for that too. And then we finish off the week with Monday night as Dallas visits New Orleans. And with that, Week 16 of the 2017 PFA season is in the books. I can't wait for Week 17 as a whole bunch of teams and some teams could possibly clinch a playoff spot and a whole bunch could be eliminated. So tune in soon for Week 17 of the 2017 PFA season as we get closer and closer to the playoffs. Just 4 weeks remaining.